I always knew that there was one person in my life who would never betray me or leave me in trouble. My father. He wasn't just a parent, he was my whole universe. Growing up without a mother could have left a void in me, but my dad filled it with love, care, and an unshakable sense of security that never faded, even on the darkest days. I remember rainy evenings when we would sit by the window, and he would tell me stories about distant lands and great people. His voice was so deep and calm that even the fiercest storms seemed insignificant. He taught me to believe in myself, to never fear mistakes, and to always find the strength to move forward, even when the whole world seemed against me. "Remember this, little one," he would say, gently touching my forehead. "You can always come back home. I'll be waiting." I believed him. Always. But time passed, I grew up, and the world beyond our home began to pull me in stronger. I had my own secrets, but I never lied to my father. We were a team, and there was no room for deception between us. I could tell him anything, about my first crush, my fears about the future, my dreams that felt so fragile. Yet looking back, I realize, nothing is ever perfect. Even those we trust unconditionally may have secrets capable of shattering our reality. I never believed in love at first sight. It seemed like a myth, something created for romantic movies and books. But the day I met him, my whole world turned upside down. His name was Alex. Confident, charismatic, with a voice so smooth it sent shivers down my spine. He spoke as if he knew all the answers to questions I hadn't even asked yet. There was something dangerously alluring in his eyes, promising thrilling changes. "You're not like the others," he once told me, running his fingers lightly over my wrist. "You have fire in you." And I wanted to believe him. With him, I felt different, grown up, independent, fearless. I was no longer just my father's daughter. I was a woman capable of making her own decisions. But my father saw Alex differently. "I don't trust him," he said one day, looking straight into my eyes. "He's too good to be true. You just don't want me to grow up." I snapped. My father frowned but said nothing. I knew his words weren't empty. He never spoke without reason. But could I walk away from the feelings that completely consumed me? Could I step out of this whirlwind of emotions just because someone else decided it wasn't right for me? No. And that's when the crack appeared between us. At first, small, barely noticeable. But with each passing day, it grew wider. I started spending more time with Alex, coming home less and less. Conversations with my father became shorter. His gaze, more anxious. But I didn't want to see it. I chose love. Or what I thought was love. But is a choice always the right one? I'll take a short pause. Write in the comments where you're from and if you've ever heard similar stories. Maybe you've had a similar experience yourself. I'd love to know. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Now, I continue. At first, it was just small things. Alex would forget our plans, saying he was too busy. He wouldn't answer my calls, then show up later with a casual excuse, "Sorry, work's been crazy." I believed him. But soon, the inconsistencies became obvious. He said he stayed home all night, yet his phone had messages from friends at a party. He promised I was the only one, but I caught the glances of other women, ones who seemed to know something I didn't. A creeping feeling settled in my chest, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step could send me tumbling down. And one night, I took that step. It was a regular evening. Alex canceled our plans again, saying he was exhausted. Something in his voice felt off, but I forced myself not to overthink it. Until I saw his car. Parked outside a cafe on the other side of town. He was inside. Not alone. I couldn't look away. A girl sat across from him, laughing. He leaned in too close, too familiar. The way he used to lean in with me. They were speaking a language I knew too well, the language of lovers. My world shattered. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the sound of cars and conversations around me. Everything inside me screamed, "Go in there. Demand the truth." But I couldn't. I just turned around and walked away. Tears blurred my vision as I wandered the streets, but my mind had only one question: how did I not see this sooner? I don't remember how I got home. I don't know how much time had passed, but when I stepped inside, my father was already waiting. He said nothing. Didn't ask why I was crying, why my hands were shaking. He just handed me a warm blanket and sat beside me. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to admit he was right. But instead, I just buried my face in his shoulder and whispered, "It hurts so much." He didn't respond. He just held me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a little girl again, the kind of girl who, no matter what, could still come home. But now, something had changed. I felt guilty. But not just for myself. Something had changed. My father was still there, supporting me as always, but the lightness in his eyes was gone. There was a tension in his movements, and he kept his phone close, never leaving it unattended. I noticed it immediately, but at first, I blamed it on my own emotions. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was looking for problems that didn't exist. But the longer I watched, the more my unease grew. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. The house was dark, except for a faint strip of light coming from my father's office. I stepped closer and froze. "I can't keep doing this," his voice was low, but there was strain in it. "She's starting to suspect something." A woman's voice replied, calm, almost gentle. "She doesn't have to know, does she? You don't want to destroy everything, do you?" Something inside me twisted. I couldn't breathe. She? Who were they talking about? Who was this woman? I peeked through the small gap in the door and saw my father sitting there, hunched over, phone in his hands. He looked exhausted, older than I remembered. "This isn't right." He exhaled, dropping his head. "But you keep doing it anyway." The woman's voice was soft, but it carried certainty. I couldn't listen anymore. The world I knew was crumbling. Betrayal. But not mine. And not the one I had expected. I had always believed my father was my guiding light, my unshakable foundation. He was the one who had taught me about honesty, about loyalty. And now, I stood there, shaking in the dark, realizing that my entire life, my perfect picture of family, had been a lie. I could pretend I hadn't heard anything. Close my eyes. Hide in the comfort of denial. But now I knew the truth. And it was tearing me apart. The truth changed me. I looked at my father, the man I had always seen as my closest person, my pillar of honesty, loyalty, and strength. But now, I saw him differently. He noticed it. "We need to talk," he said one evening as I sat in silence, staring into nothing. I didn't reply. "I know you heard everything." My fingers clenched on my lap. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Then tell me how. How should it look so I can accept it?" My father sighed heavily, rubbing his face. For the first time in my life, he looked broken. "I never wanted to lie to you. I was afraid. Afraid you'd stop seeing me as someone you could trust. Isn't that exactly what happened?" The silence between us was unbearable. My reality had shattered into 1,000 pieces. I could have ignored everything. Pretended this conversation never happened. Returned to the familiar world where my father was my hero, where his mistakes were just human flaws. But I was no longer the girl who believed in fairy tales. I stood up. "I can't forgive this." My father looked up at me, pain in his eyes. "But I can't hate you either." I walked toward the door, feeling my heartbeat pounding in my chest. This was my choice. I'm leaving. Where? I didn't know. But I knew one thing: I was no longer the person I used to be. And this was a new chapter. Or a point of no return. Write in the comments what you think about this story. Have you ever experienced something similar? Your thoughts and stories mean a lot to me, and I appreciate every one of you. Your comments help me create even more engaging stories. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video so you don't miss new thrilling stories. Write the phrase, "The truth always comes out," in the comments so I know you listened until the end. Wishing you a wonderful day.